Welcome back, everyone, to the Connected Teamwork Summit. I'm your host, Hilke Faber, one of the co-hosts, and I'm here for this next discussion about team-defining moment, getting to know each other with Matt Oppenheimer. Matt, how are you today?
Doing well. Good to see you, Hilke.
Good to see you. I'm so appreciative that you are here. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Matt. And before I do that, just a brief reflection on the first two segments of our conference so far, where we heard from Carson about appreciation and from Erwin about goal setting. And one of the things I appreciated about Carson is how he talked about how appreciation creates this plugging in such situation where we can be plugged in all the time, no matter what happens. And that creates the fabric of relatedness from which everything else is possible. And then talking with Erwin about having goals like summiting Mount Everest that help us see that we are capable of so much more than we think we are. So very grateful to be in this exploration. And now continuing with Matt, who is a dear friend and a person that I deeply admire for his humanity, care, leadership, and courage to follow his vision. He is the CEO and co-founder of Remitly, and Remitly is a digital remittance provider in the world. He's a leading digital money provider and transmittance provider. Matt is one of these people that has an inspiration and trust it. Like I know about you that you started alcohol-free parties and drug-free parties in high school, and even your grandmother was part of that at some point. And you have this ability to relate human to human. You've built this amazing organization of thousands of people worldwide now, together with others, that is so values-led. I think about compassionate partnership, constructively direct, joy, things that to me describe who you are, besides a person that always has me soften on the inside and make me sit up like, okay, Hilke, you can be even better. So welcome, Matt.
Thank you, Hilke. Feeling is very mutual and really honored to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, we're going to talk about this team-defining moment called getting to know each other. We have 12 team-defining moments in the summit that we're looking at. So tell us a little bit about how what you've learned about creating connectedness in your teams, in your life, through getting to know each other. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's a great point, Hilke. And by the way, if my voice is a little off, it's because I'm getting over a sickness. So appreciate your patience on that. But and when it comes to team defining, or defining moments in terms of creating connectedness within a team, the first thing that comes to mind is I think that there's varying degrees of connectedness with oneself. And I also intentionally brought up the fact that I'm sick today because we all show up at different times in different ways with, different work meetings and things that we have. And being authentic today, one of the things that I needed to do before this is really just sit and connect with myself, connect a little bit more with how I'm feeling and how I'm doing. So then I can show up in a little bit more authentic and connected way with you, with others that we're chatting with today. And so the way that we've implemented that at Remitly, if I think about my team, is it's a continuous effort to first give people the opportunities to connect with oneself, give them the psychological safety to do that, give them the space to do that. I think that we can all, as we're debating various business topics and things like that, get flooded. It's something that's happens with me where, it's hard to kind of stay at what we call at Remitly above the line in terms of being our best, most connected and rooted is a word that you use, Hilke, authentic self. And so we can go through a bunch of examples in terms of how we've instilled that at offsites, at our executive team meetings. There's a lot that we also need to continue to do better, and it's been fun to learn from other speakers that you've had both today and in general, Hilke. But I think connectedness has to start with oneself first, and making sure that as we're coming into a place, that there is that connectedness that's the foundation.
Beautiful. Yeah, and as we were exploring this topic of like getting to know each other at work, right? Behind the mask. I love that you start off with saying, I'm not feeling well. And I'm so grateful you're here anyway. I hope you're taking good care of yourself. And when I got your message this morning that I'm not feeling well, I was like, well, that's part of connectedness too. I'm so appreciated that you are sharing that, so
Yeah.
that we can know what we're in for here for today.
Yeah.
So how do you help, and maybe start with yourself, this whole process of getting to know each other? To me is like a lifelong journey, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you give yourself the psychological safety to
Yeah.
get to know Matt? Let's start there.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's been a constant journey. I mean, I'm surprised, I'm now in my 40s and I'm still surprised that I learn things about myself, whether that's via very good friends that help me process and point out things about myself, whether that's within that very good friend group, my wife. She's helped me grow and get to know myself at a much deeper level in terms of blind spots that I might have had. Um, Therapy has been helpful. Getting myself in that right headspace in terms of meditation and prayer has been helpful for me specifically. So I have to come to it with that like curious growth mindset and challenging my assumptions always. But I think that the thing that's been one of the biggest growth areas for me, and I think this also we try to instill within the Remitly culture, is as one gets to know oneself or as one gets to know others, how to approach it with a without judgment and without judgment. That doesn't mean there aren't, especially in the work context, acceptable behaviors versus not acceptable behaviors, but we all are the way that we are because of our lived experiences, because of who we are. And for me, it's still a journey. As I've gotten to know various aspects of myself, my upbringing, my influences, I'm very proud of a lot of who I am. And there's areas where I'm like, wow, I really would like to be different in that way. But as opposed to berating myself, accepting it and recognizing that we all are a product of our lived experiences, I think is a super helpful mentality, because that is, I think, where kind of authentic growth can come from.
We all are a product of our lived experiences, and how you relate that to stepping out of judgment, and into something that's more connecting. Tell us, give us an example. Like, give us an example of what happens with Matt
Yeah.
when the judgment thing goes off,
Yeah.
and how do you step through that? How do you work yourself through that? I can share my own experience with that, which I have daily. Like, my
Yeah.
mind is so attuned to things not going to my expectations that the first thing the mind goes to is wrong,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
wrong, wrong. To
Mm-hmm.
give you an example, our LinkedIn link wasn't working this morning while I was doing my keynote, and
Yeah.
my first thought was some really aggressive thought towards myself and then to some
Mm-hmm.
people that work with me. And
Yeah.
it took conscious effort to say, whoa, 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 step out of this. Remember, this is a
Yeah.
summit about connectedness. And you just said that judgment
Yeah.
is one of the key disconnectors. So how do you work yourself through that?
Yeah. It's a great question. Um, to make it more tangible, this is more of like a growth area of mine. When I say I didn't even realize things until my 40s, there's a book. Well, before the book, what I didn't realize about myself, and I think this is true in a lot of society, is the unconscious bias that many individuals have around fatness. That term specifically. And there's a book called "What We Don't Talk About When We Talk About Fat" by Audrey Gordon, who which I started to read because I was challenged by some of my close friends and others that kind of said, I think that there might be some unconscious bias that you have in that space. And I'd never actually put things like body weight or fatness into that category of like unconscious bias. I always had thought of things like, age, gender, ethnicity, things like that, that I think are more common within that world. And it's opened up a whole area for me that at first I was like, oh my gosh, I was so frustrated myself because obviously I wouldn't want to have any sort of bias, conscious or unconscious, towards anyone. And when I read that book, it was actually very hard to like recognize some of the bias that I had in that specific space, and how much more attuned I am to it in society now. And so to the hard on yourself point, I think there were instances there where I did have to take a step back, make sure that I was in the right headspace myself, to where I wasn't judging myself, recognizing that I'm a product of the world that we live in, but then take that and say, well, what can I learn? How can I challenge my own beliefs and assumptions with curiosity? And it's led to some really beautiful things at Remitly, in terms of that we now have an affinity group called Bodies at Remitly. We have a leader who's the affinity group leader of that group, who during the interview process, I saw on her resume at the bottom that she was the affinity group leader for the equivalent of Bodies at Remitly at the company that she was at before. And it just led to this amazing, authentic conversation. And I do think that when things like that happen, it also creates a different level of psychological safety, curiosity, and openness that then also is applied to, you know, how we serve our customers, how we interact, how we get things done at Remitly. So that's one kind of more tangible example.
And you make it sound so simple, Matt, right? So in a way, and I know it's not that way. And you also talked about the journey that you make in that moment. So tell us a little bit about what is that inside of Matt when you're not above the line, when you're in this judgment, and how do you traverse that murky terrain towards curiosity, compassion, understanding, relatedness? How do you traverse that terrain in between?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's another example that's coming to mind that I can maybe share. It's somewhat relevant to your question, but I would say that, yeah, I think examples are important in instances like this. After our youngest child was born, in terms of connectedness, there was a lot of connectedness in terms of like a new being in the family, but there's also a lot of like sleep deprivation. There's a lot of like just a lot of dynamics. I mean, it's just, and so it's hard to take care of oneself during that period. And so what I found myself in that period doing was especially being short with the people that I loved most, namely my parents and my dad in that instance. And I can't remember if I've told you this story, Hilke, but I'll remember it for the rest of my life, because I do think that modeling is an important component of, you know, how we all become who we are. And to answer your question more directly, one is I knew in the moment that I was just like, I was a little bit exhausted. I was going to be below the line. So I tried to be gentle with myself in those instances. But then what I did, and that is I don't know if I actually was as gentle with myself as I should have been. I felt really bad. But one of the things that I did is I then went to my dad. I went and I said, let's have coffee. And I went to my dad and I said, hey, listen, I am sorry. I apologize that I've been short with you. Here's why. And just apologize without excuses. And I said, I've been working on some things that, you know, that for myself, that sometimes like when we interact, it can be challenging. And the thing that I'll never forget is my dad in that instance was like, tell me more about what you're learning about yourself and how you're growing. Like he came to it with like such a growth mindset. I've told him that story as well, but he could have been so like, yes, you've been a jerk and I'm angry with you as well. And instead he came to it with such a growth mindset and curiosity. And so I do think that owning one, like not berating oneself is different than, and not judging oneself is also different than a heartfelt apology as well. And I think that heartfelt apology also led to like connectedness, because, and I think it's totally okay to be wrong. And I think it's totally okay to apologize.
Yeah.
Judgment of oneself and judgment of others, I think we do a lot in society. And I'd argue that leads to less growth, curiosity, authenticity. But that's different than apologizing.
I love this. I love the way you're speaking about how that gentleness kind of dissolves the berating energy, which doesn't become like a Pollyannish acceptance of whatever it is, but it also includes the space to then see clearly what needs to change
Mm-hmm.
and how to make an amend. And then your dad saying, oh, tell me more about how you're growing. That
Mm-hmm.
is such a powerful question in getting to know each other better,
Mm-hmm.
which to me suggests everything is welcome. Everything is welcome here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to ask you after the break, because we're going to take a short break, how
Right.
you bring that attitude and orientation and atmosphere of gentleness, of really getting to know each other, want to get to know each other. How do you bring that to work at Remitly, at a company that has, high values and also high goals and is very visible? You're a stock listed
Mm-hmm.
company. So I want to know more about that. We're going to come
Mm-hmm.
back after the break. I'm talking to Matt Oppenheimer, co-founder and CEO of Remitly, about this team defining moment of getting to know each other. Appreciate you listening. See you after the break. So getting to know each other at work, getting to know each other at work with this
Yeah.
gentleness. How do you do that as a CEO of a company?
Yeah. Yeah. It's great. It's a great question, Ilka. I think that I think that there's one of our values, which I've mentioned a few times in this conversation, is lead authentically, and it was uh, it is a value that we added a year or two ago that I think has been very powerful for our culture. We actually changed it from be transparent, and it not just it was kind of an amalgamation of a few changes that we made because we refresh our values every year. But I think that it was interesting if I reflect back on the be transparent and when we think about connectedness and getting to know each other, I think that be transparent, not usually that was applied to like business metrics and things like that I felt like was a unattainable aspiration. And I think that we can't, and this goes both with me as CEO to everybody in the company, but also the other way. I expect people to use good judgment about what they share with me in the context that they share. And I expect that they have the trust that I'll do the same. And so we moved from be transparent to lead authentically, but I also think that's relevant. What do you think about creating connectedness at work? Because I think that there's an element of, it's easy to think that authenticity or connectedness means like sharing everything. And obviously in a work context, there needs to be discretion about what is shared, especially on the personal front. But what I think being authentic means is creating the psychological safety and the ability to, first and foremost, encourage an environment where folks know oneself, and that can be via performance reviews. Obviously, it's more effective. It's via ongoing dialogue. If it's via coaching and things like that we invest in, solid management. None of these things we do perfectly, but I think that all of those things help create an environment where hopefully folks are helping to get to know themselves better on a professional level while they're at work. But it also means creating the psychological safety for someone to be able to say, you know what, if someone is flooded by that, the term I mean is like, I've been in this situation, I've worked on it over the years where it's like, I'm just not in a place where I can engage on that topic right now. Like, I'm just like, I need a timeout. I will take a break. I will come back to this in a place where I can actually engage. I don't know the why, I don't need to know the history around that, but create an environment where that's accepted to say, okay, that's actually celebrated, that you know yourself and that you're taking a break. You actually can engage in a curious growth mindset way, because we all can't do that at times. I think is the kind of culture we want to create when we talk about the value lead authentically. Those are some examples, and then there's also examples in terms of what the company values. Like, I think that, but I can get to that next. Go ahead. You were going to ask something else.
Thank you for being so sensitive. I wanted to ask you more about this admission of flood.
Yeah.
I think that's such a powerful part of the culture that you're able to talk about that. Can you tell us about what, maybe an example of where you experienced that? And I imagine you as a CEO being at very high stakes situations a lot of the time. A lot of eyes are on you. And
Hmm.
so not always might be an opportune time. I'm thinking, maybe I'm totally wrong with this,
Hmm.
saying, well, I'm flooded at the moment. I need a timeout. So tell me about how you have worked, or how do you work with this admission of flood as a CEO, and how do you work through that?
Yeah. I mean, one example I think you and I have talked about in the past, Helka, is, during during one of our many fundraising processes in the private capital markets, where the outcome always looked very good, but we often got a lot of no's along the way. And um, that was at a time when we very much were reliant on capital to continue to grow the business. And we would get no after no after no. And there were some investors I honestly didn't have great feedback, but there were some investors where I really wanted their feedback.
Mm,
And after the 35th no, and back feeling against the wall, if I would have asked in that moment and said, "Hey, listen, I'd love your feedback," that wouldn't have been effective. I would not have been as curious
mm,
growth mindset, because what I needed to get done in the short term was like get this fundraise done.
mm,
And so it was making a note to go back to some of those investors that I really respected and wanted their views, to say, "Hey, listen, tell me more. Like, why?" Because they don't really have an incentive also, if there's any defensiveness, to share, because they just want to stay in touch. They don't want to like upset the entrepreneur.
mm,
Tell me more. Tell me why. And that led to some really good things. Like, most of our rounds were our private rounds were led by an investor that passed in our previous round, because we did come with that curious growth mindset. And ultimately, especially in the private capital market, investors
mm,
get a board seat. They want to be helpful. And
mm.
so that's one example that comes to mind.
I'm thinking about how your dad said to you, tell me more about how you're growing. And that same curiosity you are able to transmit to your investors. And that creates
Mm-hmm.
forward momentum and forward possibilities, as opposed to end of the line, you didn't like me and I'm out and you're out. It's a
Yep.
very different situation.
Yep.
So continue the thread that you were on already about how do you instill this culture of authenticity and being able to be honest about floods or other things. How do you do this
Yeah.
at Remitly?
I do. Yeah. So I think that there's also a powerful element at Remitly, in that if you were to ask why, what brings, it varies probably in degree, but, and by the way, everything I'm saying, we're by no means perfect. Like, as I'm going through and talking through some of these things, I'm thinking in the back of my mind, we can improve that, we can improve that, we can improve that. Hopefully without too much judgment, but just noting that, like, the world is not binary. We can improve in a lot of the things that I'm saying.
Mm,
Um, but the example that comes, the other thing that I think is unique about Remitly is, um, I think everybody at the company, or I hope everybody, the majority of folks at the company, are there because they really want to make a positive impact in our customers' lives. And we all have multiple motives. We all have multiple motives. We have motives, to provide for our families, to get recognition and promotion, there's a lot of different, to learn and grow. But I do think that some companies really weight heavily on, how can I get the next promotion? How can I like get the next, dollar, etc. Um, and I think there's a very special part at Remitly that's rooted in that, like, connectedness and purpose, which is, we're here to serve our customers, and
mm,
we make a very positive impact in the world by doing that. And I do think having that foundation is super important, because what is required to accomplish that might actually be different in terms of connectedness and growth. Some of the things we're talking around authenticity, customer centricity, et cetera, that might actually be different than a hard charging sales organization that is trying to maximize short-term profits or something like that. It
mm,
just creates a different culture in terms of authenticity and connectedness, I think. So
mm,
I think
mm,
that's an important part as well, is like, why are people there in the first place? And I think
mm.
people are Remitly, like, for multiple reasons. But I think the majority of Remitlians are there because they want to make a positive impact on our customers' lives, and then everything kind of else like flows from there.
I love this connection between having higher purpose and that creating a space to be authentic, because authenticity becomes more important in the pursuit of a higher purpose than just a small ego goal, which might be, maximizing short-term profit at all cost. It's a
Mm-hmm.
different
Mm-hmm.
situation. We are getting amazingly already to the last 5 minutes of this conversation. Before we get to the close of this, I would love to hear from you a very brief example of how authenticity made the difference in
Mm.
this? How authenticity made the difference? Like, what was the road not taken, and how did the authentic road make the difference? Can you share a quick example if you have one?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I won't use a name because it involves a specific individual, although this is one of many examples. I think the areas where authenticity has made me most proud and I think driven the best business results is when it's enabled people to kind of really so it actually has been that, to be more direct, so I'm not too vague, it's when it has opened people's apertures to understand what they truly love, what they're truly good at, and let go of some of the shoulds or the momentums that I think can carry us in our career. So it's been via role changes. Sometimes the example that comes to mind is this was several years ago, but an individual who really got to the root of what mattered to them, and that root of what mattered to them actually meant them no longer being at Remitly.
Yeah.
And I've seen that individual continue to soar and succeed and have greater fulfillment and happiness. And that individual was with the company for 5+ years, and made an enormous impact. And it was with a lot of mixed emotions that person left. But that's the kind of authenticity that I think can help, because it enables people to themselves get to a very good spot, as opposed to underperformance, other things that can start to rear their head if that authenticity doesn't take the kind of forefront.
Yeah, I see authenticity leading to self-reflection, self-honesty, and also decisions that are authentic and therefore carry weight and gravitas and create a culture that you may want. Final question. We can speak many hours, and you and I met. Final question for this call is, what would you say to somebody who's looking for just a practical tip, practical tip, and say, well, yes, authenticity sounds great, but in my company, that's just not how things are. What would you say to them?
I would say two things. One, the first thing is don't settle for a company where you can't be your authentic self. And the second is, if you come to a meeting, a situation with curiosity, connectedness, calm, ease, rootedness, a lot of things that you often say, Hilke, that those around you, that you might be surprised with those around you. And if you're not, it goes back to the first piece of advice, is work on finding a place where you can be that way.
Thank you, Matt. You definitely helped me, and I think many others, to realize that being authentic is probably far less scary than our mini mind makes it up to be. And by doing so, we create safety for ourselves and for others. And one of the things that will stay with me lifelong is this intense curiosity for, so how are you growing through this? How are you growing through this? And this moment of acknowledgement of when we are flooded. And just saying, yeah, that's part of the human experience too. So thank you so much, Matt, for being with us also on a day that you were not feeling 100%. I enjoyed it as 1,000% and more. So thank you so much for being with us. We've been talking with Matt Oppenheimer, who's the co-founder and CEO of Remitly, about this team-defining moment of getting to know each other. We'll take a short break and we'll continue this exploration of connectedness in teams speaking with Vignesh Shetty in a moment about how do we actually think about being in service to a higher goal, which you already alluded to. So thank you so much, Matt, and thank you everybody for listening.